We're finally going to talk about the main spark that started World War I, which was with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It's important to know, though, through all the long-term and short-term causes that we've already discussed, there were other things in Europe which made war more likely. You can find these on pages 24 through 26 of your book. And these are developments such as literature, popular press, education, forced conscription, and the drawing up of war plans like the Schlieffen Plan, which kind of showed that most European countries were preparing for the possibility of war through the late 1800s and early 1900s. Now let's turn our attention back to the Archduke. In the summer of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the nephew of Franz Joseph I, which was the current Austrian emperor, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the throne, he decided to visit Sarajevo, which was the capital of Bosnia, which we already know from before that Austria-Hungary had annexed them. Sarajevo was a very dangerous place for a member of the royal family of Austria-Hungary to visit, because it was pretty much the citadel of Serb and Bosnian nationalist groups. The date chosen for this visit was of great emotional significance for Serb nationalists, because it was the anniversary of a famous victory by the Turks over the Serbs at the Battle of Kosovo in the 14th century. And we already know that the Serbs despised the Turks, which were the main group that controlled the previous Ottoman Empire. The Austrian diplomats had warned the Archduke of the dangers that he faced, but Franz Ferdinand was kind of a headstrong guy and did what he wanted. He was also a very big opponent to Slav nationalism, which the Serbs had tried to ignite back in 1912 with their Balkan League. So on the morning of June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand arrived in Sarajevo and paraded through the streets in an open-topped car, accompanied by his wife. At about 11:30 in the morning, the car moved slowly past a large group of young people lining the routes. A demonstration broke out, and the car stopped. A young man who had waited for hours then rushed from the crowd and shot the Archduke and his wife dead. The name of the assassin was Gavrilo Princip. He was a 19-year-old rebel whose cause was Young Bosnia, which was a nationalist group that pretty much wanted to kick any type of Austria-Hungarian influence out of Bosnia. His gun was given to him by a pro-Serbian group known as the Black Hands. So basically, by him pulling the trigger of that gun, a teenager set off an entire world war. So how did the Austro-Hungarian Empire react to this assassination? Well, number one, Franz Ferdinand wasn't the most well-loved guy in Austria-Hungary. However, his death provided the perfect opportunity for Austria-Hungary to kick out and demolish any type of Serbian threat from that point on. So the assassination was used by Austria-Hungary as a way to settle accounts with Serbia. In fact, on July 4th of 1914, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary sent a letter to Kaiser Wilhelm II asking for German support to, quote, eliminate Serbia as a power factor in the Balkans. The Kaiser thought about it and consulted with the German Chancellor to decide what Germany's position should be. And they both agreed that Austria should be given a free hand, or a blank check, to start a war with Serbia. The Germans hoped that a war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia would remain localized, but obviously both the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians knew that the crisis might bring Russian intervention, because Russia was now allied to Serbia, and this could obviously bring a whole European war. The German government was prepared to risk this in order to make sure that there was a victory for Austria-Hungary over Serbia. The Kaiser advised the Austrian government that Austria-Hungary, quote, must judge what is to be done to clear up her relations with Serbia, but whatever Austria's decision, she could count with certainty upon it that Germany would stand behind her, end quote. That's obviously what Austria-Hungary wanted to hear. Meanwhile, the Russian and French governments met from July 20th through 23rd, 1914 to try to discuss what they should do in this escalating crisis. The result of that meeting was that France gave a blank check to Russia, but they urged Russia to try to work things out first with Austria-Hungary, or with Serbia, who was battling Austria-Hungary. This is viewed as a second blank check because it encouraged the Russian government to risk a war with Germany and Austria-Hungary. The difference between these two quote-unquote blank checks is that the French decision to support Russia was designed to try to deter Austria-Hungary, but the German decision to support Austria-Hungary was aimed to provoke. The crisis escalated on July 23, 1914, when the Austrian government finally delivered its ultimatum to Serbia. The ultimatum basically claimed that Serbia was involved in the assassination of the Archduke and made 10 demands designed to put down the terrorist activities of Serb nationalists. Even though the Austria-Hungarian government had no clear proof of who was involved in the assassination, they just assumed it was Serbian nationalist groups. It was assumed that Serbia would reject this ultimatum. However, Serbia agreed to most of the demands, but they insisted that international law be followed in an investigation to determine who was behind the assassination. Austria-Hungary, however, refused anything less than total cooperation to their ultimatum. The Tsar of the Russian government told the Serbian government that he wanted a peaceful solution, but would not remain indifferent to the fate of Serbia. It seems like the German government desired the conflict to stay localized, but it made no effort to restrain the Austrian government or to put pressure upon it to accept a negotiated settlement, because Serbia had agreed to most of the demands, but Austria-Hungary was being very stubborn. The first declaration of war in the crisis came on July 28, 1914, when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. However, the hope of both Austria-Hungary and Germany that this war could remain localized was just an illusion. The Russian government made it really clear that Russia would go to war to save Serbia unless Austria-Hungary withdrew its troops from the Serbian territory. The Austro-Hungarian government refused. So on July 29, 1914, the Russian government announced that it had no other choice but to make plans for the mobilization of its troops, though it still wished for a negotiated settlement. The German government told the Russian Tsar that Russian mobilization would lead to German mobilization. The British in all this were basically sitting back and watching the events take place. They offered a number of proposals to Serbia, Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Russia to try to settle this whole issue with negotiation, but all of these proposals were rejected by the German and Austria-Hungarian governments. So on July 30th, 1914, the Tsar of Russia announced that Russian mobilization would take place on the following day. The German timetable for war was now put into rapid action. The German military chief of staff told the Kaiser that German military planning was based on swift action, known as the Schlieffen Plan, which involved a speedy attack on France through Belgium, followed by a move eastwards to face Russia. The implementation of Germany's Schlieffen Plan escalated this crisis into a full-scale European war. On July 31, 1914, the German government sent the Russian government an ultimatum that said unless Russia stopped all of its military preparations, Germany would have to declare war. In response, the Russian government said that its mobilization plans inferred no aggressive action, and they continued to express a desire for a peaceful settlement. Even so, on August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. On August 2nd, the German government sent an ultimatum to the Belgian government asking for permission to allow the German army safe passage for its attack on France. And because of this issue of Belgian neutrality, who had nothing to do with what was going on, the British finally committed to war and decided to act. On August 3rd, the German army invaded Belgium. A few hours later, Germany declared war on France, even though France had no major interest in the Balkans at that time. Pretty much France became a victim of what seemed to be unprovoked aggression. Italy, which had been a part of the Triple Alliance along with Germany and Austria-Hungary, had pretty much been ignored by Germany and Austria-Hungary during the crisis, so they decided to remain neutral. But on August 4th, 1914, the British government finally declared war on Germany because of the fact that Germany had gone through Belgium to get to France. World War I had now officially begun and wouldn't end for another 4 years.